Let's go into producers, and I'm just going to mention some notes as we go along, right? Essential producers. You know, by the way, I had a little side note. We're playing some Kanye West before the show started, and we're playing Good Life, and I think that's from his third album. I'm not sure. And Good Life samples Michael Jackson, and this is what I'm talking about when we talk about sampling as cheating, because sampling Michael Jackson, Pretty Young Thing, PYT, that's cheating, you know? So when you hear the Kanye song, it has a real nice vibe and you feel it, you feel good, but it's because he stole the vibe that was in Pretty Young Thing. Every single Michael Jackson song from the first two albums is going to put a smile on every single human's face, especially those who have witnessed them and live with those albums. So when you sample them, it is sampling cheating because you've already, you didn't jack just an aura that you amplified or fine-tuned it or stretched one out to become something else. You've jacked the vibe, you know what I mean? So I just want to throw that dart out because as I go into the producers, the people I'm going to mention haven't done that. I think this decade starts with the producer to me that was inspiring me, that transitioned into, and probably those two were Bronze Nazareth and DJ Muggs. The work that they were doing, though, DJ Muggs started to do solo albums in his Versus series and made incredible works, classic albums with Jessiah and Planet Asia. And I even said this to Planet Asia. Planet Asia was always dope, but something happened. He went into another chamber. He got hit with some superhero powers. Something happened. There's some kind of superhero origin story that happens in the booth when he was making that Pain Language album with DJ Muggs, because the way that he rhymed on that became a new writing style, technique, a mastery of flowing non sequiturs and insightful slang language into all these ideas, but in such perfect flows and cadences. His writing never stopped and never stopped. So, you know, just amazing, you know, and I give credit to Muggs for inspiring with that. And Bronze Nazareth continued what he was doing into making some incredible albums this decade that end up being some of the best works, or in the canon of best works, of the individuals he gave beats for. Musically, I think the progression of this decade has to begin with Roc Marciano and Ka. I give it to Roc Marciano because he had the core of the blueprint, and Ka progressed it even further. But the core that the blueprint that mostly everyone's using is Roc Marciano. Better digging, finding samples we haven't heard, then using those samples and flowing on the melody of the song, which they didn't make up. Ghostface was doing that in '04 in the Pretty Tony album, right? He was doing that all the time, right? But Roc Marciano did it where he was leaving a lot of the flaws of it. He was making it grimy, and he was giving you cadences that don't necessarily flow. Like he was rhyming out of the pocket and then making a pocket that fit in. And that's influential to a lot of MCs, even MCs you don't think. And the production, again, I'm big on production when the sampling. I think the core of everything is in the sampling, not always the drums. And not always the drums because it takes a legendary MC to know how to have great drums. And Roc Marciano to me is a legendary MC and producer, but his drums isn't consistently as incredible as others. And that's exactly by design. Whereas Ka, he innovated by taking it to another level without even using the drum. So he was showing people how to rhyme in the pockets and the grooves that were in the melodies and the undercover rhythms that are in the musicianship that is sampled in the horn section, the brass, the piano, and it took it to the next level. And of course, we have to add Alchemist, Preservation, Animoss. We have to add those brothers to it because they were in those ciphers, elevating that sound. And of course, Alchemist is crucial because what makes Alchemist so great and being more than just a primo, retro primo, which is how we started with Dilated Peoples, mainly. Alchemist's crates are incredible, and they go beyond soul music. They go heavy into hard rock, progressive rock, album-oriented rock. You know what I mean? That's why he's calling the album he did Yacht Rock, because a lot of the great albums in the '80s were considered yacht rock. That was a subgenre, and if you don't follow rock music, you wouldn't know that. So they even give you clues about where their crates are coming from. That's because they know their crates are so good. When we talk about drums, me personally, I have to start. I start with Lord Jessiah and also Adrian Younge and Kenny Dope. I consider Kenny Dope, specifically his 2 albums he did with Rashid Chappelle, especially the last one. Those blew me away. His drums blew me away. And Adrian Younge, because he's using pre-70s equipment only. And mind you, when you see an Adrian Younge performance, you actually see pianos that are mad old on stage. You see instruments, you don't even know what they are because they're old as hell. And it looked like the piano looked like it was in a movie about ragtime, like it was that old looking, the piano they were using. And Adrian Younge, his catalog is incredible. If you're a collector of a producer's catalog, that you want a vast catalog, I think he's the best one. Where I'm talking about a catalog that goes over 200 tracks. The tracks he did for soul music, hip hop, they all are in the canon of hip hop. And his drums, the way he fills a room. And I saw it when I saw him live in the Ghostface Killer Tour when they were doing their albums live. And his tracks were just different. They filled the entire room in a way that I haven't heard a hip hop track fill a room. You know what I mean? Especially live. It's just playing it live. The Roots, their live bands are incredible, but it doesn't fill up a room that way. It's just different, And when we talk about back to the retro side of it, going back to the drums, Lord Jessiah, when we talk about bass and drums, I mean, next level. I think Grounds of Detroit 2, that album and its accompanying instrumentals, find it on Bandcamp. Black 7 Pro. I think it's 7 with an S. But just write Grounds of Detroit, G-O-D, Grounds of Detroit, and look that up. I think that G-O-D Part 2, that album is one of the great beat albums of the decade. And it's my personal favorite. Plain and simple. I think that Bronze Nazareth kept making great works. 2 works I'll go into later, but he kept with the drums. What a combo, challenging themselves, Bronze and Lord Jessiah, out there as part of the Wisemen, because Lord Jessiah became part of the Wisemen after the Children of a Lesser God album. That's why I didn't mention him. But of the retro sound, which sometimes often gets stale or repetitive, and in the beginning part of the 2010s, we were getting a little tired of it. We got a little tired of what's it called? I'll name them now: Statik Selektah, Ninth Wonder, Apollo Brown. They all gave us great songs, addictive songs, but we got used to the formula. And I think that out of all of them, I think that they had great moments, even classic moments. And I think that Ninth is the one that has adapted the best. But he's had the longest time to adapt. I think Apollo Brown, though, people talk about his drums, but it's the rhythm he gives his drums. That's why when I do my Apollo Brownism, I always go because he's giving you the same stabbing bass rhythm, and that's what informs the drums for him. And I think that's the problem. You know what I mean? So there are albums like that are dope, like OC's Trophies, that are constantly using the same bass drum stabbing rhythm, and that's where we get that stuff from with him. The Sincerely Detroit album is filled with all of that, but it's still a fun record because it's like a tour de force, entire tour of Detroit MCing. I have written down here Large Professor. Large Professor had some great albums, but you can't really talk about the decade of the 2010s without mentioning Large Professor, because a lot of the great albums, and I think I'll do each year on another all-decade build part 2. I'm going to keep on with this producer stuff because there's so much to talk about. And I don't get to talk about beats too much because I'm always in love with the lyrics. During the 2010s, many of the greatest albums in the early 5 to 6 years of the 2010s were, especially New York albums, were made at Goblin Studios in Astoria. That includes albums from Starvin' B, Sean Price, Core Mega, I think Faramonch, and a whole bunch of others, right? And the producers that were there, like the engineer, Piece to Spend De Niro, right? One Take, and a lot of the other producers that were there, they were influenced by the legend that was around there, that was hanging out there, that was also doing work there, and that has to go to Large Professor. A lot of the early great beats that New York albums had, they were all the influence, under the influence, the guys, the next level, coming from Large Professor, and Large Professor, the limited work that he gave us hasn't lost it, The 2 albums, if I remember, it's 2 albums this decade. I love them both, Let's see what we got in the scattered list. A legend I forget, who I think, I didn't mention him in drums, I didn't mention him in keeping a sound, because Madlib fits none of those. His sample game was always top notch, and he's always unconventional with his drums, and always unconventional with his formats. So being able to give classic backdrops twice to Freddie Gibbs, making those 2 Freddie Gibbs albums, I think you got to have them in your collection, And I think Bandana is actually even a better work. Madlib continues to have crates and continues to innovate techniques, and is always continues to be unlimited in the way that he'll structure a song. And that's the thing about, I made points about how MF Doom is clearly better than Gibbs, and that has to do with accomplishments and also lyricist output. If we go bar for bar, like what they said, Gibbs is not even, he doesn't have enough work. He doesn't have enough quotables. But when we talk about flows and techniques, Freddie Gibbs is a perfect MC for Madlib because he can do anything with him. And I'd be remiss though. I talked about Muggs. One of Muggs' great innovations, and I talked about it heavily in the book. There's a big feature on Muggs in the book, his whole career, because he was the producer of 2018, and I went back into those records and back into his past. I think that DJ Muggs did one of the greatest progressive things that you could do as a legendary producer to keep this music alive, and that was find MCs that are up and coming and on the verge who have made great works and make albums with them. I think 2018, the MCs all took advantage of that, leading into the first album he did with Ito, Hell's Roof, which probably is a top 3 album, a must-have for 2019. I think that the other MCs, Fahim and Mac Hami, I think they could have done better whereas I think Crime Apple equaled his best work with that. So I can't be mad about what Crime Apple, did. But I thought that Fahim and Makhami, they have a tendency, and maybe it's their flows. Maybe I gotta listen again and always give it a chance. You always give good records a chance again and again, but it feels like they cash it in at times, especially Fahim. But you also had great producers. I don't think anybody else that I know of, but I loved the progressive work, sampling, the hardcore sampling, the great work that Seventh Dan was doing with Cyrus Malachi and Triple Darkness, particularly on that Black Athena album, which is one of my favorites of the decade. And he passed away in the decade, so that his work be him and his work be revered in posterity, and that he be remembered in positivity, because he was one of the really up and coming great producers. I can't finish. There's a lot more. There's so many other producers, but you have, I'll just name drop a couple. Crucial the Guillotine of Noble City Crew, which kind of guides most of the great works that Zagnif Nori has had. A wonderful sound that takes the grit and influence of the Wu and the Wiseman and all that, and gives it a new crunch, a new style, and the sample game is just, it's top notch. I can't talk about samples if the foremost producer of a mass amount of work, keeping the sample game alive, though, that is from this decade, I probably would have to give that honor after Roc Marciano to Giallo Point. And Giallo Point, such a diversity of MCs that he works with, whether SD Knack or the Booze Brothers, like that's really diverse. Napoleon the Legend, he's made great works, albums, complete albums with all these guys, including a lot of UK MCs and MCs everywhere. And his sample game is able to offer people a unique sound for those individuals. So it's really great. And just off the head, MC producers of the last couple of years, the Artivist, Farma Beats, Futurewave, and there's a whole bunch. Raticus, who I love his drums. I love his drum works and his sequencing of drums, the patterns.